Good afternoon. This is Henry Hatter. I'm your host today. We have a great show with a candidate for the Genesee County Sheriff's position. He is Steve Sanford, and he's probably well known in this community, probably all of his life. Have you been in this community for a while?
Actually, no.
Oh, you
No.
haven't? Well, please tell us a little bit about yourself, Steve, so that we'll know who you are.
Okay, I grew up in Muskegon, and I joined the Army. I was stationed at Fort Wainwright, Alaska. During my time in the Army, I deployed to Mosul, Iraq as in 2005 as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom 3-4. And while there, I was injured in a gunfight with members of Al Qaeda in Iraq, and was retired from the Army. Spent about 3 years learning to walk successfully, but it's about 6 months before I could walk with a cane. And then moved back to Michigan, and in 2012 we moved to Linden, Michigan. And I've been here ever since. 2014 I started volunteering. I'd done some volunteer work before that, but it was a regular basis then. My kids go to, my son goes to Linden schools, my daughter isn't yet old enough. My wife works, so we've, my daughter was born at Hurley Hospital.
So you're well documented here in Flint, Michigan. And that's good, because that's what people will be looking for, your relevance and your preoccupation with issues here in the county. And from a sheriff's perspective, what are the three major issues that you see relative to law enforcement in Genesee County?
Well, the violent crime rate is clearly the top priority. Any law enforcement agency that doesn't put protecting human life as the number one priority isn't doing their job. And Genesee County is together all part of what is called the Flint Metropolitan Statistical Area for crime reporting, and that Genesee or Flint Metropolitan Statistical Area is consistently very high in the rankings for nationally for per capita violent crime rates. That has to be the number one priority. The criminal justice system here also has to work so that when law enforcement does apprehend an offender for a violent crime, there's room in the jail for them, they get processed through the court system quickly, and they get a fair trial and justice is served. And the jail obviously is going to be a critical part of that. The jail is consistently overcrowded, and the processing time for people from trial or from arrest to trial, as we've seen recently with the gentleman who was incarcerated in the Genesee County Jail for 5 years before then being acquitted, that's clearly a problem. That's not justice for anyone, mm-hmm. because the victims' families then have to wait 5 years to find out that the police had the wrong person, mm-hmm. or whatever. So the victims' families are denied justice. The accused is sitting there losing 5 years of their life. Their families are missing them for that time. If they're a parent, the children are then without the parent. My father died when I was 8, and growing up without a parent is very difficult. Yeah.
Steve, now there are 4 bodies of law enforcement in Genesee County. First, there's the police department of local Flint, the police department, and then there's the sheriff's department, mm-hmm. and then there's the state police. There are only 3, right?
Federal law enforcement.
Yes, that's right. How well do you get along together? How do you make the process cohesive and solid to address the criminal problems when you have an incident, for example? Do you work well together?
Everything that I've seen, I haven't seen any I haven't seen any problems with the officers on the street having trouble working together as a team, because we all have the same goals. We all want to protect people. We all want to make the community safer. We don't all have to like each other. I'm sure there's people that don't like me or won't like me, and there's people that I don't like, but you have to be able to put that aside. And every indication I've seen is that people do that. You're doing the same job. You don't have to go to each other's birthday parties and barbecues after. But
And Steve, people need to know that law enforcement is very, very important to us. Policemen are very important. We have targeted over the years policemen as the bad guys, but we cannot live in a community or a system without policemen. Do you want to address that issue?
That, to me, the bond between the community and law enforcement is the only way that we get anything done. If that bond isn't firmly established, if people in the community don't trust their law enforcement, why would they go to the law enforcement with a witness statement or a criminal report? Statistically, crimes like sexual assault are one of the most underreported crimes for a variety of reasons. And so there's already a challenge in getting those crimes reported. And then when you add on a distrustful relationship between law enforcement and the community, or you have a community that, as I've seen around here, doesn't distrust their law enforcement, they just do not believe that their law enforcement has the ability to actually solve the problem. They don't have confidence that the problem will be addressed.
Law enforcement is one of those critical issues that's difficult to deal with. Everybody sees it from a different perspective, a different lens. But sexual assault is not one of the major ones that arise in the police department.
Nobody likes to talk about it.
Yeah, but it does not. We don't condemn our policemen because they do those kind of things. Only once in a while would you find an incident where that is prevalent. But most of the incidents that I know about has to do with the police encounter with young men, black men, over the years. Mm-hmm. And it appears that there's still some animosity and anger, and it's being driven politically by political parties too, that we need to do more to address that issue. And the question that I have for you is, in law enforcement in Genesee County or anywhere else, is one fit all a good approach to that in this climate today?
One fit all very rarely fits anyone. From my experience, the political motivations and of targeting law enforcement is, to me, some politicians using law enforcement as a scapegoat for their own ineptitude, because the police are the only job of the police is ever to enforce the law. Law enforcement doesn't write the law. It wasn't a police officer that wrote mandatory minimum sentencing or higher sentences for crack cocaine versus powdered cocaine. It wasn't a policeman that wrote that. But police are nevertheless tasked with enforcing the will of the legislature, which oftentimes doesn't look at the unintended consequences down the road. If we make a law that says you have to arrest everyone for this, when we had marijuana, when recreational marijuana wasn't legal, and it was an arrestable offense, then the unintended consequence of giving somebody who made a mistake and is 18, 19 years old and has a little marijuana on them, and then for the rest of their life they have a drug conviction on their record, that it limits their options for employment, for different types of financial assistance, and what is the eventual goal of law enforcement is to make our communities better and safer. And so our laws should also reflect that our goals are to make our community better and safer. And if a law doesn't serve to make the community better and safer, then what is it serving? Is that law, then we have to ask, why is that law something that we need on the books.
Yeah, there has been, we need to improve this process. That's one of the things and a lot has been done to improve the relationship of the black community to law enforcement and to the major community. Today we have young black men that still seem to be a little bit angry. In particular, this is not a good thing.
I'm angry too. Look at our community has been ignored by the state, the federal government, and the water has been promised to be fixed for how long? The crime rate has promised to be addressed for how long?
Yeah.
People should be angry.
Well, they're angry over other things that keep bad. With all of the advancements that we've made in trying to rectify problems with race, there are people that still don't get it. That we have to work in this together to bring together a stable, secure, and healthy community. And I think law enforcement is part of that, because that's who we see most of the time. It's a law enforcement officer. And law enforcement officers need to be able to stand firmly on the law, cite the law, and refer to it, and do what they need to do with just and legal behavior, not to corrupt it in any way. And when people think about the choking event in New York City, I guess it was, that's one that I often hear, they get angry about that, and they talk about it a lot. But how do we correct these kind of problems?
One way that I see to correct that is transparency. Mm-hmm. In 2017, the Federal Bureau of Investigation established the use of force reporting, law enforcement use of force reporting study. So whenever someone is injured or a law enforcement officer, fires their gun, even if they don't hit somebody, that information, including what was the reason for the original call, why was the officer there, all of this information is plugged into this FBI study. Now, the pilot study began in 2017. 93 law enforcement agencies around the United States participated in that study, from federal law enforcement agencies to small tribal police departments, big metropolitan police, city police departments, sheriff's departments. The FBI itself is participating in the study. To the best of my knowledge, no law enforcement agency in the state of Michigan has participated in that study. I don't think the police are out there looking to shoot somebody or looking to beat up somebody. But today everyone has a camera, and so the glimpse that we get on YouTube or on other news networks is that, well, this is a 35-second video of this officer hitting this person. There's no context, and so it leads people to believe that this is what law enforcement is doing. I don't believe that's the case, but neither side has any concrete facts. We don't have the data. If you don't have the hard data on how many times law enforcement officers fire their weapons, on how many people are sent to the hospital from a jail, then how do you know where to improve the training as law enforcement? If there is a deficiency in training, if we need to send officers to more firearms training, if we need to send them to more de-escalation training, how do we know what to do if we don't have the information?
Was there at one time, if you go back 10, 20, 30 years, was there a time when we had just terrible authorization when policemen encounter a subject? You shoot first and then ask questions. Was there a time when that was carried too far at one time?
No doubt there has been repeated instances where people go too far you're always going to find exceptions. Prior to, I believe, I want to say it was 1983, 1986, there was a standing law that law enforcement officers were legally permitted to fire their weapons at a fleeing felon. So someone committed a felony, the police officer has reason to believe that that person just committed
Just
a felony,
automatically. He
and
could
they can,
fire.
and they can shoot him.
Okay, I want my audience to understand how things that may have changed here.
Well,
Because
the
this-
case
this-
went to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
It's Tennessee versus Gardner.
Yeah.
I believe Memphis, Tennessee officer shot at the time, young man, last name was Gardner. He was climbing a fence after after the officer suspected him of burglarizing a business. I don't know exactly what the outcome of that was, but he was climbing a fence. The officer shot him, and the shooting was ruled justified because the officer followed the policy of the Memphis Police Department. He followed the laws of the state of Tennessee, and there was no federal law prohibiting it. The family sued and appealed, and it went to the United States Supreme Court, and the ruling became known as Tennessee versus Gardner, in which just the fact that a felon is fleeing is not justification for the use of lethal force, because it is a violation of due process.
I've seen that.
There's
I've
civil
seen,
liberties.
Yeah, I've seen those issues brought up before, and seen the change in the usage of that corporate kind of policy. It is more relaxed now, and it is really a detriment to shoot a young child in the back. And people watch that.
Even if it is fully justified and like legally permissible, there's no way that looks good or feels good for anybody.
So we have moved away from that process. We've grown a little bit, right?
We have.
We can be certain and be confident that those kind of behaviors have long past gone.
Well, and things like the use of force reporting study will help that, because it'll show where officers are using force the most. For instance, if the FBI, in looking at this data from all across the country, determines that, well, most law enforcement shootings are a result of, say, this type of 911 call, we need to address how we respond to that particular instance then. Maybe we need to send more officers, maybe we need to send, maybe I need to make somebody, bring a mental health professional into the process with us. There's a lot of different ways to fix the problem, but until you know where the problem is, you can't do much.
Well, thank you. And the sheriff is responsible for the jail. He incarcerates, he holds them there, he secures them, and he protects their civil rights. So, all right. Okay, I'm going to move.
And the courthouse security, and the chief law enforcement officer for the county. So there's three large areas that the sheriff covers.
Genesee County
and the paramedic program, which is, not all areas have that, but the Genesee County paramedic program, the deputy paramedics, that is part of it. So there's 4 large areas that the sheriff has to manage.
There's limited incidents reported of abuse in the jail. Am I right? Here in Genesee County.
Well, there has been numerous lawsuits.
Well, do we have we don't have a high incident of illegal treatment of prisoners, do we?
I don't know. I don't work in the jail.
Okay.
I don't.
Yeah.
I haven't. So I honestly can't answer that. I don't. Of the corrections officers that I've met, I don't.
I have not
They
heard
all
it.
seem. They all seem. They all seem competent and not out to. I mean, I know there was several lawsuits. And one in which I believe the settlement was $16 million. So I mean, there have been incidences, but you are going to have that in any place where you're incarcerating people accused of crimes.
Now I want to talk about the community in which you will be functioning in as sheriff. Are you fully comfortable with coming into a community that has had the highest crime rates in the world, the poorest schools, poor performing schools, and sharp criminal activity that have made us the capital city of the world, as you may have remembered? We have had that distinction at one time. So are you prepared to come in and deal with the problems of that nature? What will you do to remove that stigma, or strive with other units of government to minimize the impact of that stigma that we have?
Well, the first part of your question is absolutely, I'm prepared for it. When I was in Mosul, Iraq, in the U.S. Army, it was the IED capital of the world, and
What was?
yeah, there was improvised explosive devices going off constantly. Mortars, everything. It wasn't. But that being said, I don't recall ever meeting somebody face to face in the city of Mosul that wasn't a nice, kind, caring person. 99% of the population was and is. People are people, and there's always going to be people want to live their lives and raise their families and enjoy their hobbies and worship as they choose. And most people don't want to be out killing people or hurting people. And so you have to protect the majority of the community from a very small percentage of the community who are of any community, and it's not just Flint, where the people don't have any regard for the law, where they do want to hurt other people, where they have ideas about whatever that causes them to commit violent acts, and that you're going to have that everywhere. If I wasn't willing to go in and address those problems and work to address those problems, then I wouldn't be running for sure.
Yeah, and I can see that. Now, as you know, their public policy, you will not only be dealing with legal policy that's particularly attributed to the sheriff, but you will be dealing with public policies as well. You will come into other institutions who have public policies that bear on law enforcement. For example, you have public schools,
Mm-hmm.
which you must respond to when there's an incident.
Mm-hmm.
You have
There's about 8 to 10 school resource officers that work for the
Yes.
sheriff's department or that are at different schools around the county. So
yes, and you have the incident reporting. Should you have a train wreck someplace, the sheriff then is the officer that's in charge of that process.
as long as the train gets off the tracks enough that it's not on railroad property, I believe. I don't know how the railroads are under their own police. It's the Canadian National Railway Police. And so I
didn't know.
And so I don't. Yeah, but yeah, it's they have jurisdiction throughout Michigan and several other states and parts of Canada actually. So it's a multinational police.
But in order to protect the interest of the people of Genesee County, which is your authority, your responsibility, you must do the things necessary to do that
Mm-hmm.
without apprehension and without hesitation. So that's another big, major responsibility that you have. In addition to that, you have to protect the public health and safety from those who would injure themselves or injure others with a firearm or with any other way.
And in my opinion, one of the most important things is you have to protect the trust that people have in not only law enforcement but also our judicial system and our government and our the voting process. You have as the chief, you have to protect that trust, because once everything breaks down, then you don't have you don't have any of that. So.
I think that's what people want to know, is whether they were going to have a sheriff with integrity, with the capacity, with the strength, the resolve to follow law enforcement as it is written and as it is thought to be, where it is just and fair for everybody.
Well, if
that's
it's
what
not,
I think the people.
If it's not fair, then it's not justice,
Yeah.
and that's part of the problem. Is that sometimes the incident on the ground doesn't match with our particular values as a
How
society.
will you work with other institutions of government in the city of Flint? When Flint is the seat of everything.
The county seat.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And how will you work with Mayor Neely, for example, and the County Board of Commissioners to create an environment where it's where people find the justice that they want under the law, and they also find safe communities, which is so important, and to protect our kids from themselves and from others who would do that.
I don't. My wife says that my biggest fault is that I am far too honest. She says, "Honey, sometimes you need to lie a little bit." and obviously that's
I understand.
you know what I'm saying there. Okay. I endeavor to always give people my honest opinion, and I know full well that they're not always going to like that. But I also endeavor to always not, just because I disagree with somebody on 1 or 4 or 300 things, doesn't mean that I dislike them as a person. And you have to build these relationships with Mayor Neely, for instance, and the judges in the district attorney's office, because we all have to work together. And so you have to be able to pick up the phone and listen to their concerns, and then do what you can to address those concerns, and in turn they need to do the same thing. For instance, that man that was held in jail for 5 years, the sheriff was, that individual was in the jail, so they were responsibility of the sheriff. But the reason they were in the jail for 5 years was because of the district attorney's office, and the time it took the district attorney's office to process that case, and then went on to the trial, and things like that. And so you have to be able to work with all of these people and other law enforcement agencies.
But those were violations of his civil rights, weren't they?
In my opinion, but I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I know, but you can't. But then there was the press. The press has the right to look at that and say, well, is this just...
Well, and the press is something, again, that a lot of people leave out of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Transparency in people seeing how law enforcement is working and how laws are being enforced comes from the press. You're not going to have the entire population of the county following, patrol cars around to see what they're doing. And so the press also has to have a responsibility to report on issues that matter. We all hold each other accountable. And so building these relationships now is very important. As I'm running for sheriff, there are campaign events and things like that that are focused on criminal justice. There was the Nation Outside Flint Matters Town Hall, and they invited myself, Tim Johnson, who's also running for sheriff, Trishelle Young, who's running for district attorney, Torshio Feaster, who's running for Flint City Judge, and then all of the other judicial candidates. I don't know all of their names, or exactly which office they're running for, but there was a number of people on that panel, and so we see each other on these panels frequently, and so I've told a number of those other candidates that we need to work together now to get to know each other and develop these bonds now, because in a little while here we're going to have some serious issues that we're going to be responsible for dealing with. So we need to learn how to talk now. And they have all, Democrat, Republican, they've all agreed. We all get along good. And so it's above partisan nonsense.
Okay,
So.
If you had all of the money that you wanted to reconstruct law enforcement in the county, where would you start?
Where would I start?
Yeah.
Investigators.
You would add more people?
And more investigators. In my opinion,
Okay, well, we got to come this to an end.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have to go. We've had a great time. Thank you for being...
Service dogs, too. Therapy dogs.
Therapy
and
dogs.
CPR training. For
Okay,
inmates.
thank you.
Those are three.
But we've got to wrap it up now. I appreciate you. I hope you'll come back again.
Thank you.
And I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is the In My Opinion show coming to a close. So stay focused.